In this session, we'll be talking about for and while loops. We'll essentially be understanding what loops are, when to use it, why to use it. Let's begin with understanding what for loops are. For loops acts as an iterator in Python. It goes through items that are in a sequence or any other iterable item. So for example, there are objects that we learned that we can iterate over, include strings, lists, and tuples. And we even built in iterables for dictionaries such as keys or values and so on. So we've already seen that how for statement works a little bit in the past. I just introduced you to for loops at a very bare minimum understanding, and how it could save a lot of time to repetitively go about writing something. It was so easy to use for loops to iterate over lines during files. It was so easy to iterate over in dictionaries, and same thing in lists, and when we did the list comprehension. So it's very easy to use for loops. So in general, as an understanding, we use for loops when we are iterating over multiple. The reason it's called a loop, because it cycles again and again until your condition is met. Until your condition is true, it keeps going on. So those are something, that's why it's called a loop. And let's just look at the format of for loop. For loop item in object colon, that's how it is, and then there will be statements to do stuff. And the important part in this is keyword for, and then the keyword in, and then the object that you're referring to. An object could be a simple variable, it could be a list, it could be a tuple, it could be of any variable type, it could even be a file or a function, because everything in Python is treated as an object, and that makes it a whole lot interesting, right? And the variable name used for the item is completely up to the coder. So you can use your best judgment to choose a name that makes sense to you, and you also keep in mind it makes sense to someone else will read when they go over their code or your code that you're going to write. And if let's say you're trying to write something where you're talking about cars, you don't want to name something a movie star in that code, because somebody will not understand what, let's say you name it Tom Hanks, people will not be able to understand when someone else is going over your code. When you're going to make car references to objects, if suddenly Tom Hanks walks in, they don't understand it. But this item name can be referenced inside your loop, for example, if you wanted to use if statements to perform checks. So I will give you some examples and share some best practices along the way. So let's go ahead and work through some examples for loops, and we'll also come back to while loops right after that, and then we'll see more about using loops as we go deeper in programming. So we'll start simple and build more complexity with loops. Let's get started. I'm going to switch over to my Jupyter notebook. All right, now let's try to see how we can iterate over a list. Okay, so I'm going to create a list. I'm just choosing list because it's very straightforward. It's mutable and you can write on to it. So I'm going to say this is my list, and I also have 10. Great. So that's my list. Now how do I print all the numbers of this list? So if I have to say print, or I just have to say, if I have to print this, I'll have to do this, and then it will print 1, and then I'll have to do this. If I have to print number 2, I'll have to do this. If I have to print number 3, and so on, right? So this is how hard it can get. Look at that, I already made a mistake. So it can be really hard and tedious to print every number in the list. So for loop hence comes handy in these cases. When you're iterating over multiple objects of a Python element, then this is where we do. So it's for every number in L, okay, print number. Now when I do this, it prints, okay, so what am I missing here? You can see I'm missing a major important thing here, and this prints the parenthesis, and this prints 1 to 10 this way. So it saved me from indexing every element inside, but it went over a loop of doing this same thing, and it printed what I exactly wanted. Now that's what is the power of for loops. I can put anything here, I can call this a Ferrari. Let me just take something else so I don't get confused with that. I'm going to call it Italy, for example. I can call this Italy. It has got nothing to do with, no reference. All right, I can call this anything I want. It would still do the same thing. Let me show you this. Okay, I'm going to rerun this, and it still does this. The green things in Jupyter is what is important, right? And the object name, which is our variable name L. Apart from that, what you write here is gibberish. It's ignored, as it understands that it's not gibberish, it's an important thing. So I'm going to call it number. I want to be decent and be readable, and also to be known for by reputation that I write clean code. It's very important, and I'm going to keep it number. And Python understands that you're referring to the elements inside that list. Great. I hope this makes sense. Now let's add a if statement to check for even numbers. But let me introduce you to a concept called modulo. Modulo is a remainder. So if I divide, let's say 3 divided by 2, the remainder will be 1, right? Or if let's say I'm going to divide 17 divided by 4, and the remainder will be 1. If I change it to 5, the remainder will be 2. If I change it to 6, the remainder will be 5. Let's see some more examples just so we get this right. So 10 divided by 3 is 1, because 3 times 3 will be 9, and 10 minus 9 is 1. Correct? And I hope you are with me on this. Let me give you more examples just in case you're forgetting. What happens if I do 4 divided by 2? There won't be no remainder, right? So I'm going to do 4 divided by 2. Yes, there is no remainder. There is a 0. Correct. So do some more of this so we know that we don't get confused this with anything else. It's actually the remainder that is there, and it will not continuously divide. So, and only when the number is fully divisible with known remainder, the result of the modulo call is 0. Now, we can use this to test for even numbers, since if a number modulo 2 is equal to 0, that means it is an even number. Now, let's get back to for loops, and I'm going to print and see if we can use for loops to print only the even numbers from our list. Let's print our list first so we don't forget. Great, so it's got 1 to 10, and I want to print only the even numbers. So that means I need to print only those numbers that are whose remainder is going to be equal to 0. So it makes it very easy if I put it that way. So let me show you how. So for every number in my object L, if number is all the numbers when divided by 2 are equal to 0, then I want you to, I need you to print the number, right? So if that number in my list is when divided by 2, the remainder will be 0. When this condition is true, print that number. So this is what it will do. It will print all of that. Now we could also put this in else statement, right? I can also put something more. So what about the other numbers? They are not printed. So let's put something about it. Let's say else print this is a odd number, right? So whenever it runs through the loop, it will take 1 in the list, and it will divide by 2, and it will take the outcome and compare it, is that remainder equal to 0, and it will return a false, so it will not print that number. In this case, it will move on to the else statement. When 1 divided by 2 is not equal to 0, it will say print this is a odd number. Great. So that's what it will do in this case. So it will print odd number whenever there is the odd number, and then it will print 2. Now that makes it very easy, right? So if I have to print an odd number, I just have to change this, right? I just have to change this. When this is not equal to 0, this will print only the odd numbers. So if somebody in any interview asks you, this is a very common thing that they ask you to understand your for loops that print prime numbers or Fibonacci series or even numbers and odd numbers, and this is how you do it in one go. and anything else would be considered that you don't have enough experience in Python, and this is how you do it with just a few lines of code. Now, another common idea during a for loop is keeping some sort of running tally during multiple loops. For example, let's create a sum, something that sums up a list. So I'm going to say, oops, I'm on this tab. Okay, so I'm going to say sum, my sum is equal to 0. Now I'm going to say for every number in the list, my sum is equal to my sum, oops, I'm going to assign my sum plus the number that is there. So I can keep a tally of whatever is happening, and then I would say, okay, all right, now I have my condition, I want you to print what you have. All right, so print, oops, print my sum. So this should, let's say it will begin with 0, my sum is set at 0, and it starts at 0, and it will go all the way to from 1 to 10 in my list L, and it will keep on performing. It will take my sum, it will take 0, it will take 0 plus 1, and it will take 1, the value of this will become 1, and it will take 1, and it will go with 1 plus 2, and so on. So it will add all the 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, and if someone tells you to add all the numbers in a list, this is how you do it. Right, read over the above cell once again and you understand what is fully going on. Also, we could have implemented something like this in one go. So let me show you, you can further shorten this by putting something like this, by putting just a plus here, and then it does the same thing, but it's doing a little extra. I'm going to just have to take this off, right, and I made a mistake, and now it's giving you the same result now. Great. Now we've used for loops with lists. How about what happens if we use with strings? Remember that strings also have a sequence, and we can iterate through them, and then we'll be able to access each of them in a string, correct? So I'm going to do that for letter in this is a string, for example, or I'm going to take something more. I am a fan of Avengers. Let's say I like Captain America. Just something to put there, and I'm going to say print letter. So this will just print all the letters in that, and again I made that mistake of parenthesis. By now you know what can happen, and I'm sure if we were in a live class you would be the first to point out. Now what happens if we do this for loop in a tuple, right? So I'm going to call a tuple, I'm just going to name it G, and just some random number, it's got nothing to do, and it's got 5 digits in it. Now what I can do with this is for every something in my tuple, print that something. You know, I can put anything I want. You know, I'll tell you this is not right, so I'm going to make it for every T in T, or I can say for every item in item, whatever, it's all the same, right? And some more examples to follow. So there is a special quality that I want to introduce you to, where especially when you're iterating through a sequence that contains tuples, the item can actually be the tuple itself. Now this is called tuple unpacking. Now during for loop we'll be unpacking tuple inside of a sequence, and especially if you run into a situation where you are returning this value in a JSON format and you recognize it's a tuple, and that's when we unpack that and sort of break it down to extract data out of it. We'll be using them in use cases later on, and let's say this is a tuple, and then I have, and this is a list of tuples, right, and some sort of values I have. I'm going to say 55, 44. All right, so this is my variable, and then I'm going to say for every item, I can even say element to make it easier, in my list, right, print my element. So this is how it prints them, and notice how it's out of that list and it's broken down. Now I can unpack this. Okay, so I can do this for T1, T2 in my list. Print, I can only print just the T1, and this will print 2, 6 and 55, and if I print T2, it prints everything. And it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it you can call it I don't know what you want to call it. Okay, let's call it Obama 1, and I can call it Obama 2. It doesn't matter. Python doesn't mind you at all, and it just prints the same result. So this, what is in the parenthesis, is understood as you're referring to the elements inside the tuple. If let's say there were 3, then there were 3 elements in this tuple, we would have 3 elements here, and we would identify it by declaring Obama 1 is the first element, Obama 2 is the second element, and if there was something 3, we would call it, and then it would print whatever we tell them. So that's how sequence works. We can access items inside them through unpacking, and the reason this is important because many objects will deliver their iterables through tuples. Cool. So with tuples in a sequence, now we can access the items of them inside through unpacking. Now the reason this is important because many objects will deliver their iterables through tuples. Let's start exploring iteration through dictionaries to explore this further. So we've tried this on lists and strings and tuples. Why leave dictionaries alone? So let's bring it on and see another example. I'm going to create some space on my screen. So okay, great. Now I will take a dictionary that from our previous session which we created, and I have key 1 assigned with value 1. I have a key 2 assigned with value 2. I have key 3 with value 3. Let's say this is our dictionary. Now if I want to iterate over it, so I would just say okay, I would iterate over it for every item in my dictionary, print item. So this will print all that is there in it. Okay, this is not defined because I did not execute this. Great. So that's how it prints all the keys, and you can also print the values. And I want you to try printing the values on your own, and then let me know how it came through. I want you to try this as an example, and let me know how it goes. So we just need to do it something like this for K and V in items. So I'm going to say, look at this, I'm using a method. This is Python 3 special, and I will call upon the object, and I will use a built-in method by putting dot. And when I do a dot and hit tab on Jupyter, it gives me certain methods, right? As you can see, there are certain methods. So you just can't put a dot and hit tab, you will not get it. You need to put a dot after your dictionary. So in this case, it understands it's a dictionary, and it will give you a list of methods that you can perform. That's why Jupyter Notebook is so good, and I'm recommending this to you. In this case, we can do keys, we can pop, we can update, we can set default, we can clear the entire dictionary, we can copy it, and we can do something from the keys and get something. So we'll use items, and I'm going to show you how to use this, and I will put like this, and I can say print only the keys and stop just at that, or I can also say print only the keys or stop just at that, or I can also say print even the values. So this could be anything again, this could be anything, this could be anything. I'm just addressing something so it becomes more readable, and that's how you print all the keys and values. Now let's conclude what we just discussed. All right, we've learned how to use for loops to iterate through tuples, lists, strings, and dictionaries. And it's a very important tool, and make sure you know this well, understood all the above examples. And once again, unless you try this on your own, you would not have learned it. It doesn't matter how much of an expert you are. I'm not saying it because of personal gratification, but it really does make sense if you spend time with it. The more time you give it, the better you become at this. See you in the next class.